Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we are bringing back one of my favorite people in the open source community. We're going to be learning about a new meta framework, or I guess a new-ish meta framework. And to teach us all about it is just a good friend, Ryan Carniato. How you doing?
Hey, how are you doing, Jason? I'm doing pretty good myself.
It is great to have you back. It's been quite a while since you and I have had a chance to talk about software.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I think it was, 2021 probably. I feel
think
like.
so, yeah. So we are long overdue for a catch up. But so before I start talking about what you've been working on, let's talk a little bit about who you are. So for folks who aren't familiar with you and your work, can you give us a bit of a background?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to say it. I created Solid.js, the JavaScript framework, many years ago, it feels like now. And that was just kind of the start of my journey into open source. I ended up taking that knowledge, writing articles about what it was like to write JavaScript framework, talk about topics that a lot of people don't talk about around framework design, performance, rendering. I ended up getting hired at eBay to work on their framework after doing that. And
And that one's Marco, right?
yeah, Marco, exactly. But through that, worked with a lot of the other MPA frameworks that were kind of coming up at the time because Marco is very similar to Astro. It's like Astro's bigger brother, like an older version of the Islands thing. So I ended up in with them and the Quick people and all the people trying to like push new stuff forward. And next thing you know, I find myself working at Netlify full time on open source in general, mostly Solid, obviously, but just having great experience working, out in the open, constantly streaming, publishing articles, hackmds of my rough ideas involved in conversations, just anything to kind of push this stuff forward. I'm very intent on moving things in a way forward that isn't just say marketing or whatever.
Right.
It's important that there's different aspects obviously to software and different priorities, but the most important thing to me has always been like ensuring that like when we decide to go in an approach and decide to buy in on architecture, is it viable? Does it actually work? Is this just smoke, or are there benefits here? I'm big on benchmarking, measuring things, and trying to wade my way through the crazy mess that is front end development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've had a very, I would say, substantial impact on the industry because I think, you didn't invent signals, but you definitely were responsible. I forgot to turn this lamp on. You were definitely responsible, I think, for kind of repopularizing them. And after you kind of reintroduced the world to signals, it feels like they then got picked up by just about every popular framework. And since then, it seems like the Solid team has just sort of been not just working on Solid, but very heavily embedded in working with other teams. And we've seen, I think, a pretty impressive wave of collaborative innovation happening where like all the different frameworks are moving together, learning lessons from each other and implementing them in a way that feels healthy. It doesn't seem like people are, doing anything that I don't know. Like sometimes it feels like people are sort of competitively trying to copy each other's features, and sometimes it feels like everybody's working together to try to make the web better. And it feels like the last few years in the framework land has largely, with a couple exceptions, felt like we're all trying to work to make the web better.
Yeah, no, I definitely. I think I remember when I entered into this conversation, people had really drawn sides, and a bit there was like the Vue and Svelte I felt on one side and React on the other side, and there was this whole like templating versus JSX and all this stuff, and everyone like had been really set up in their kind of like assumptions of where the world had to go and what the paths forwards would be. And I mean, this was one of my early challenges with Solid, even getting adoption, was because I came in, I'm like, no, why can't we do this, right? Why can't we bound? People are like, oh, that's JSX, you can't do this with JSX, blah, blah, blah. And it led to a lot of, Solid came out as this thing that shouldn't exist. Everyone had by fitting into their camps, had actually assumed it wasn't possible, right? Like they kind of,
Oh.
and I feel like once we showed what was possible, it opened up the floodgates in a crazy way, right? Like one of the things, signals that you mentioned, a big one, right? Because signals were around back in 2010 with Knockout or some version of them, right? There'd been advances over the year. MobX, really important in that role. So as well as another library called SJS, which will never get enough credit, but really innovated in this space. And what we discovered, and largely this is actually thanks to the creator of SJS, Adam Hill, was that fine-grained rendering was actually a thing. It's not just about signals. If you have signals, it's just another change detection mechanism. It's another thing that makes adds more to your framework, makes, another layer. It was that signals allowed us to delete a bunch of stuff. It allowed us to change the assumptions. And once we started down that path, next thing you know, everybody, I say next thing you know, but it took like a long time in JavaScript years. Like Solid and its predecessor, based on SJS, showed that this approach to rendering was viable. Like SJS showed the client side, Solid worked further on SSR and all these other things to context a lot of the more advanced features, concurrency. But I'd say there's been a thread that showed that this is the way forward since 2017, let's say.
Okay.
Now fast forward 8 years, and the Vue with Vapor, Svelte with Svelte 5, Angular's moving this direction. Preax also added signals. Quix added signals in 2022. Almost over the last couple years, almost everyone has actually moved over. It took a long time. It feels like for me it's taken like 8 years for people to get here. I evangelized for ages, but we've been getting there. But the to your other point, it's more than just the signals thing. This is part of communication that got us all talking, right? Mm-hmm. So were some of the everyone needing a meta framework, MPA thing I was talking about earlier was another thing getting us talking. We've seen like bundlers essentially become the next frontier in terms of making things work. So the problem is once you bring in SSR and all these other things, the complication goes through the roof. You have to abstract it some way. Right. You have to have better tools to build with. You have to build up those building blocks. And
this feels like another space where we kind of saw a introduction of a new concept and then a unification, because this is, if I'm remembering correctly, this is where Nitro out of the Nux team really kind of came in and was like, hey, what if you didn't have to rebuild every single part of a meta framework and you could actually have most of this working? And then Vite, same thing on the front end. Hey, what if you didn't have to rebuild every single front end with 1,000 Webpack plugins and you could just kind of put these things together? And then also I did a stream recently on Vinci, which I believe came out of the Solid community, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. This is it's been 3 years, and it's been a very long journey for me along this trajectory. But yes, this has been all part of the stages of this kind of evolution. Vite really kicked it off with Vite. When Vite 2 came out and they're like, we're for everyone, we support SSR. It was like having Create React app, but better. You didn't have to worry about ejecting. You had the full flexibility, and it's because of some very smart but somewhat simple things, like having their plugins work cross-sectionally. Instead of being used to with Webpack back in the day, be oh, here's a plugin for this environment and here's one for this environment, and you always had to be okay, this is for dev, this is for prod, this is for SSR, this, and you had 4 different Webpack configs. Vite was no, have a single concern, something you care about that you want to add, single feature, and you'll make a single plugin that works for SSR, works for prod, works for dev, single slice. And it's a minor thing, but I believe that's the whole reason why ejection works, why it's so expandable, and why Vite is such a powerful thing. And yeah, I saw Vite, and that was finally what tipped it over. I was playing around with stuff, and everyone's Solid needs a meta framework. Everyone needs a meta framework, and I was I don't want to write a meta framework. You write a meta framework, and And like, no, it's a lot of maintenance and a lot more
Yes.
opinions. And even if you try and keep minimal on it, it's very, very difficult to like do it. Like, it was hard enough as a small team to maintain the surface area of Solid. And I have so many ideas on how to make Solid better. Why am I going to spend 3 years on a meta framework? And the problem is it's very key these days for adoption, because you got to be right there in the bundler. And the problem is, even with Vite, even with projects like Nitro and Vike is another one I should mention. We used to be Vite plugin SSR. There's been attempts, like various attempts of standardization. Even in the platforms, they're trying to standardize on these things like was it Winter CG? Like, there's all these serverless runtimes that all have different things, and it's like the browsers all over again, where you suddenly have like a kind of sort of spec, and everyone has to implement their own version. We spent years, like people hopefully now are past Internet Explorer, right? But like, it's not all Internet Explorer's fault. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
it was the Wild West. We had all these different browsers trying to implement different features, and some couldn't keep up, and they all had their own standards. We're in that mess right now with serverless and SSR, and different providers are like, we have, I don't know, let's name one, PPR, like it's specific only to Vercel, or
Right.
we offer these features, and like, it's very difficult to navigate. And like, there's just so many of these facets, and at a certain point you have to go from all of those pieces back to the developer. And even for us, I would have loved to just pick up Nitro off the shelf and be like, yeah, good to go. But there's even more considerations when you have to go and take this the last step to the developer, because you're like, no, like, this is still a mess. We haven't actually solved things for them. We're too low level. We're too mechanical. And I had a difficult challenge with this with Solid, because you got a small ecosystem, and then you're like, okay, let's do SSR, and it's like, are we going to sacrifice something for this? Or are we going to have I couldn't afford to break the ecosystem apart. I couldn't, like, you've seen React server components. I couldn't like suddenly be like, guess what, guys, half your libraries are no longer relevant anymore. Like, I couldn't do that. And
Well, I mean, I would say like React is about the only community that survived that, because every other community that's tried that major break, it has effectively been the death of that framework.
Yeah. Don't have to bring up Angular to Angular 2,
Right. I
I guess. So like, it's a very difficult proposition. So when I looked at the idea of bringing server to the client, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to change these client libraries. I want to use every single one of them still, if possible. And that's very early in the stages. Back in 2021, I want to say, even before we did this all 1.0 release, I'd come up with this idea. I didn't know what to call them exactly, but of doing RPC calls.
Okay.
But I did a proxy thing with RPCs, like, and I actually called them actions back then. It wasn't based on like forms or anything. I just was trying to think like command action. Like, I'm sometimes I get really hooked into like stupid stuff like CQRS, for those who know what it means, like command query segregation, like technical computer science stuff. And I was just like, okay, I just need a term for this thing. And I remember thinking, oh no, Svelte has actions and those are different. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to do this thing. And I was playing around with these RPC calls, right? And then I remember very around the same time seeing Remix for the first time, and with their loaders and actions. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is kind of cool. I fell in love with their optimistic update style, but I was like, I don't like this just being route level. I want to be able to call these functions anywhere. And it's so funny because I was going to the Discord and I was like, guys, we should do something like this. And everyone's like, oh, so you've heard of Blitz? And I'm like, what's Blitz? So I looked at Blitz.js and they had this RPC type thing. And I'm like, yeah, this is almost it. But it's still too much. Like I want it to just be a function. And another core member of the Solid team came to me and he was like, let's just make a compiler for it. This member was Nikhil Seraph. And he basically built a compiler and then later a bundler, because we realized it wasn't enough just to have a compiler. I mean, we went down that road. I don't know if some of you remember, me, Tanner, and Nikhil tried to push a library that gave what later became server functions to everyone. This is this idea of like you just write a function, say it's a server function, and then just call it anywhere. And on the server, it's a normal function call. On the client, it's an RPC call. We thought we could give them to everyone. There's complications there. We realized it was a bundling effort because code splitting. It's really awkward when
Right.
you load the server function on the client side but haven't navigated to it on the server. There's no endpoint. So, we went through a lot of iterations of this stuff, but eventually Nikhil was like, I've rewritten this so many times. He was doing React at work, and he was like, he was like, I'm going to build my framework manager thing. And that's where Vinci came from. And he was like, but then I'll have to deal with all this different deployment partners, like I don't want to figure out the difference between Fly.io and Vercel or or Netlify or whatever. So that's when we finally, like, it's so Daniel kept on telling us, we're working, Daniel Rowe from Nuxt, he kept like, every time I'd be like, oh yeah, but it's so hard to make these things agnostic. And you'd see Daniel very politely in the corner put up his hand and be like, we're doing this. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, agnostic storage, agnostic this, agnostic. I'm like, how do you even do that? This seems so ambitious. And he's like, we decided to do that. And we found the JS community, and we decided to take our kind of multi-bundler built on Vite and then bring in Nitro as a way of doing it. And that's how Vinci was formed. And once I saw that, I was like, okay, we need to rewrite SolidStart on this because I can't maintain this mess of stuff that I've been doing so far. And yeah, in the end, we built mostly, as I said, Nikhil's work on Vinci, but we built this agnostic piece that could work as a base for any meta framework because, again, we built it with Solid in mind. We built it with React in mind. I guess he hasn't been on yet, but I'm sure you'll have Tanner come on and talk about TanStack Start at some point.
And that's also built on Vinci, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the Start was a nod to SolidStart because both of us didn't want to create a meta framework. And and he's like, well, Ryan, if you're already going to do the legwork, I'll just jump in on that. So that's kind of like the story. But what's crazy about it is in the process of doing all this exploration, like we stumbled on ideas and patterns that have actually been profoundly impactful on the rest of the ecosystem. Like as I mentioned, server functions, right? This predates use server from React. We actually, funnily, in classic Solid way, switched to using use server from our original server function approach because React popular and I wanted tooling and bundlers to align. It's kind of, some people mention the fact that like Solid had signals before React had hooks. But when hooks came out, we switched to the array destructuring approach. Again, that wasn't as much to align with React. Just it was brilliant, and I wish I'd thought of it earlier. But same kind of idea. And now we're seeing server functions all across the map, right? Which is the kind of modern version, which is kind of a mix between our server functions and Remix's loaders.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's so many places to go with this stuff. I'm always working like 6 months ahead. That's what's one thing we're talking about SolidStart, and I'm like, wow, man, I got to remember about SolidStart. I know it just 1.0 out in May, but for me, I'm already like 3 months on the other side. I have to kind of go back in time and be like, what was I doing in the spring? And do that. I don't lie. I get a little nervous coming on this show because it's a good test. Like this is how I can see like how well we are, like we do at actually making things intuitive and people actually using it. And great moments come out of it. I don't know if you remember, Jason, but that moment in your stream when it was like, oh, you asked a question like, well, how do you do global state for Solid? And I was like, it like didn't occur to me to think about it that way. And we lifted the create signal call from inside the component to outside the component, and suddenly we had global state. Yeah. I've used that in demos ever since. Like every Solid demo has that in it. It happened very first time on this show.
I love it. I mean, that's wonderful. So I have a question from the audience, and then I want to actually jump in and start playing with this stuff. So you just talked about how you're always working 6 months ahead. I've seen you working at kind of a furious pace ever since I met you. So what are you doing to make sure that you don't burn out on this stuff?
Yeah, it's tricky. I have to admit, during the middle of SolidStart, I definitely got to points where I was just like really, really tired of doing bug fixes every day, working through stuff, not making much progress. See, the hardest thing about this is as long as things are moving forward, then you can stay excited about it. But when things, inevitably hit those slowdowns and you have to figure out how to balance stuff, and it's definitely tricky as someone who, like, if you've looked at a solid repo over time, I've always tried to keep the issue count really low. Like, it's larger now, but for the longest time, we never had more than 50 issues. Like, I really took pride in the quality of what we put out there. It's something I can control. SolidStart at one point got up to like 400, 500 issues, and on the first beta, and I just couldn't manage them. Nikhil had just started a new job. He wasn't around anymore. At that time, he had taken like 3 to 6 months off from open source. And I was just like looking at the stop file, and there were people helping with issues, but I was just like not getting anywhere. And I knew that it wasn't, it was beta, so it's fine. I knew our expectations were realigned. And I actually at one point went issue bankrupt and just closed all the issues in SolidStart and started over again, because it was a rewrite anyways. Like, I just, things had gone thing, but it is tricky. It's important to have perspective, and sometimes that means walking away from the computer. So I think that's key. But I mean, it also helps that I am incredibly motivated. I don't know where that motivation comes from all the time. But like, as long as we can keep on moving things forward, I just like switch gears sometimes. I go into, I start writing instead of coding, or like find some way of just address, like, exercising a different perspective. Because sometimes the best thing is a step away from a problem. Often not even doing anything related. Like, sometimes these things just take time, which has always been the hardest thing for me to accept. I used to think that if I worked all the time, like I worked all day and then maybe took a couple hours and then maybe worked late at night or something, that I'd just get more work done. And that wasn't true. Thinking ideas only come so quickly. So you have to actually like give it time to breathe, to actually like understand what you're actually doing. So I don't know. It's
the abstract part of process is very difficult to quantify, but you're exactly right. You can't work your way through a hard problem. You have to do the work that you understand, and then let your subconscious start organizing pieces so that you can actually know what you should be working on, because otherwise you're just kind of grinding against nothing.
Yeah. There's a follow-up question about, do you do any sports? Hiking is something that I am avidly doing. That actually helps a lot with thinking. Go hiking with my family. We're all actually avid hikers. We originally from Vancouver, British Columbia, where we had really nice mountains. Right now we're in San Jose. There's some mountains around the edge of the bay there that are good, daily hike kind of thing. So that's important. Walking, keep your head clear, get some fresh air. Like, it's one of my favorite activities. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I'm not like, I don't hike in nature, but I hike in cities. Like, I love a good 20-minute walk through the city to go to a coffee shop or to get lunch or something like that. That to me is, I kind of use it for the same thing, because I don't have my phone out. I can't look at a computer. Just kind of walking and like head down, like kind of sorting through the things that are going on in my life. I'm very much a fan of just a walk. Like, a walk is such a good strategic unlock. Like, it forces you to think instead of do, and I really feel that that's undervalued by a lot of folks. Okay, so I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for coding. So I'm gonna bump us over into the pair programming view. So give me just a moment to get my screen shared here and hide that thing. And so first and foremost, we're talking to Ryan. So make sure that you head over and give Ryan a follow on all the platforms. You can find links up in here. Get on that YouTube list too, because that's a good one. And we are learning today thanks to Netlify, who's covering the captioning. We've got Vanessa here with us from White Coat Captioning, taking down all these words. And let me put up the banner for that so that if anybody is looking for those, you can find them. This is the link down at the bottom if you want to get the closed captions for the show today. We also are going to be working with Tuple. Tuple is for pair programming. We're going to be using it today so that Ryan can do things like point at something on the screen or even paste something from his machine onto mine so that we are able to just work a little bit faster. If you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's really nice. So thanks to Netlify and Tuple for making that possible. We've been talking about Solid.js. Let me throw that in the chat here. It's great. We've got episodes in the backlog on Solid if you want to learn about that. But specifically today, we're going to be learning about SolidStart. So let me get the SolidStart link up on screen here, and then I'm just going to ask Ryan, if we want to learn SolidStart, what should we do first?
Yeah, we should get a project going. I don't know what's your preferred place to get a project going. We have a few options here, as you can see.
Yeah,
but
let me close a couple of these things down here, and we'll just get back here, and I'm going to, oops. What do? I had this open, and then I...
yeah, we can do, what is it, PNPM create solid is...
and I haven't used PNPM. It's one of those things that I like. At some point, I should.
So that works. That works as well. I didn't realize that worked. I always use npm and init solid, but it wouldn't. But yeah, same. All right. Is this SolidStart project? Yes. Right now we are still differentiating because of the difference. Now the question is, do we want to do a basic project with the router, or do we want to do a bare project? And this is a funny first decision, and it says a lot about our whole perspective here, because SolidStart, while a meta framework, at its very base, does not actually need to ship with the router. We've tried to build the meta framework router agnostic. If you've seen Vinci previously, you can kind of get an idea of, like, we built Vinci very much with this in mind, right? There's a file system routing convention, but that can feed into any kind of file router. So like, I think we might install a couple of these templates through the course of the stream just to kind of like play around, but maybe we can just start with let's just do basic. Why not?
Okay.
The thing is, the bare template, while very cool that you literally get an app.js and it's just like create React app back in the day, or like how you would start like a typical Vite project. I think most people are going to probably want a router, so we can start there.
Great. So I'm just running the npm install here, and then I'm going to get init, and then we're just going to open this up. And we want, what did I call it? Let's learn SolidStart. There it is. All right. So I'm going to maximize this again, and we are installed. So let me npm run dev.
Exactly, yeah. And you can see the Vinci commands right there. I mean, this is just a thin layer over Vinci, which is, a bit of a layer over Nitro and Vite and Hello World. So the only difference between this and the bare one is that there's a router, which is why there's links at the top. See, the thing is, SolidStart without the router or whatever, like literally is, I think it bundles to 4.5 kilobytes of JavaScript. That's our starting baseline. You can add everything on top. With the router in this, I think we're up to about 9 or 10 kilobytes because we have like a few other things. But this is like the basic setup for this. It was really important to me that if we're going to solve SSR, we're going to solve SSR for everyone who uses Solid, not just for, people who use Solid Router or people who, like I wanted to make sure, people are working on stuff like TanStack TanStack Router, and there's TanStack Query, and there's a whole TanStack. I want that people who use that to come right over and be like, oh, I'm done with React. I'm going to use Solid, and just be like, oh yeah, it just works. Like I don't want them to be like, oh, now I have to switch from Next to Remix. Like none of that, right? I told you that the server functions are a way that we could preserve any client side API. Like if you have
Right.
a React query and you want to convert it to solid query, that's cool. But if you're like, okay, now I don't really care to make API endpoints, we can just call that server function directly. And actually, I think we'll play around a bit with that to actually show this functionality in a minute. But generally speaking, this is just a typical SSR app that hydrates. And actually, I want to show something right off the bat, just so that people who aren't comfortable, go to appconfig.ts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And which is very similar to vconfig. And can you just add an option here of SSR false? I'm just going to put this on right now, just because not everyone's ready for their whole app to be SSR'd. And what I wanted to show is, you can see it, the classic white coming in or whatever. This is now client rendered. But the difference between we built this in such a way that the difference between SSR on and SSR off is a toggle switch. Like,
right.
To be fair, this is how SolidStart's been since we first started working on it 3 years ago. This is kind of become in vogue recently. We learned a lot from Remix. Remix's approach of pulling everything back into the router, I feel, is very inspired by us. That's what we did. We made a whole framework around. That's why SolidStart's so lightweight, because the router has the opinions. We pull it in. If you have a different router, well, then you can have the opinions and pull those in. And I'll show a bit about how that works in a second here. But my point is, right off the bat, you can get that kind of create React app type experience just by doing SSR false. Now you are back to where you were. This is your simple hello world app. But
right.
We're going to do more than that here today, right? So let's on off doesn't really matter but yeah, we'll do SSR true. Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah, the default's true, so you don't have to
default is true, so we'll leave it on.
Yeah.
And then so I can just get rid of it entirely.
Yeah. And let's look at let's switch back to our code view here and look at what the project got installed with, just to kind of give you the idea here. Okay, so there's a few files. We already looked at app config. It's interesting how the package JSON is indented in your editor.
This is a really weird thing that VS Code started doing, where they like collapse the lock file. I don't know why it does it, and I haven't bothered figuring out how to turn it off.
Yeah, that's so weird. Okay. Anyways, if you look inside, the main part of this project is a source folder. And inside the simple demo, we have a few entry files. We have entry client, which is basically just like our client mount point. This is like your render call in React or whatever. We made a wrapper called mount, which is basically render or hydrate based on what mode you're in, right?
Got it.
That's literally all it's doing. And if you had some like specific stuff that you want to only happen on the client, you put it here. Like you've got to start up a service worker, put it here. And then, as you can see, it imports start client, which is the start of the app on the client side. And then if we go to entry server, it's a server equivalent of it. This is actually kind of like our index HTML. There's a create handler call, but then start server gets a document, and you write it in JSX essentially. So this is where we diverge a bit. We we could have used an index HTML, but we figured like this keeps things closer in JSX, what people are using. So this is only rendered on the server. And this approach of doing this only rendered on the server between the document here and the client split means that we're going back to that classic entry point. You see div ID app.
Right.
Like this is like the starter templates of old or client only. Even though this is SSR capable and can do all that stuff, this has that same feel, because when you start your app, you ignore these two files. Let's face it, you basically ignore it, and you go right to app.tsx. I just wanted to get them out of the way, because app.tsx is where export default app, this should be fairly familiar to people. As you can see in this example, we have some context providers, we have suspense, we have all the, we have a few, typical things. We have our router from Solid Router. As you can see, for most people, the only thing that they'll probably actually ever import from SolidStart is that file routes that you see there, which is just a component that is the route configuration that we get from the file system routing via Vinci. So we have a routes folder, and it produces JSON. It's literally just a function. Like if someone was to say, we can do this exercise. Why not? Can you go above default, like outside of the function, and just do like console.log and then call file routes as a function? Yeah, like that.
Does that show up here in the browser?
That should show up in both places, actually, I think. Hopefully, if we maybe refresh the page, or maybe, you know what, it's a top level. I wonder if this might be one of the few places where we actually have to start the server if we want to pick up on the server. Okay, so on the client, we see it here. This is the manifest of the components. And this is Vinci's file routing system convention. There's some other stuff that we actually have in there as well. Like we just parse what we need off of this. For us, our router takes a component prop, which is basically, it's actually lazy loaded. You can see there's a preload call on it. And then we have some info to say that it's from the file system. There's the path of the route. See that slash. If you go down to let's pick a different route, you'll see like a different path, like /404. Like it basically mirrors what you see in the routes folder. There should be another one that's about, I think, the third route, right? So like essentially, you can map this to however you want. I didn't remove some of the extra fields on here. Solid Router only cares about children, path, and info, but it doesn't. We just get this metadata from the file system, and we could basically choose any file system routing convention.
Right.
It's built into Vinci. I haven't exposed that to the end user as of yet, but it's pretty trivial.
Right.
So this has kind of been like our approach. It's everyone has opinions about file system routing as well. It's a pain to kind of get everything aligned. I picked one that I personally like for various reasons. Whole different debate, but the idea here is that a lot of this stuff is completely configurable.
Yeah, and so we'll let me just drop a link to this episode, because Dev, who's in the chat today, already taught us how like Vinci itself works. So we built our own meta framework using it. So if you're interested in how that works, hop in there and you'll kind of see like a lot of what we're seeing in the console here will look pretty familiar when you start digging around in Vinci.
Right.
But so yeah, all right. So I'm with it. So it's this is an extremely lightweight setup.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
like there's very little here that feels, custom to SolidStart.
Exactly. That was my intention here. The file system routes have some benefits for like route preloading and a bunch of like optimizations. Like there's a reason every framework has file system routing. I think it's an important piece, but the conventions could sway. I'm not a big. This has been the hardest part, picking the right agnostic tools, and why we had to eventually create Vinci. It's really hard to find tools that aren't opinionated in some sort of way based on convention, and it's like it's very like. I made a comment the other day. I was telling someone the worst part about Vite for me is index.html. Like index.html is very helpful, and it wires things up and it makes it really easy and good to get started. But it's like you can't put it where you want it. It doesn't go in the source folder. It goes top level. It has to be there. Like we worked around it here, but like in general, those type of conventions are the hardest things to fight against as a framework author. I tried to rebuild SolidStart on Astro at one point. I'm a big fan of Astro. I'm actually sporting the Astro shirt today. But like it's trying to find the right tools that step completely out of your way is hard. So we're trying to respect that the best of we can as well. Every layer it gets harder and harder to do that. So yeah, but this is the basic thing, and it works basically how you would expect. As you can see, there's an index page and about page. We haven't really clicked around the navigation but it's like most client-based apps. If it will just like the index page is what we've been seeing so far, which is just like the counter.
Yeah. So we've got our
hello world counter, and then the about page I think is almost identical, but
just yeah, it's like just the heading.
yeah. So this is exactly right. So this is all client-side routing. The whole way that SSR frameworks work is when you initially load, they server render or server pre-render, and we support that via an option in the config. But afterwards, once you start navigating around, it's all client-side, navigation and fetching.
Yeah, so it's sort of the standard approach that we've come to expect this, right, out of a framework, is that it will load any page from the server, but we expect it to do the single page app style navigation once we've loaded it.
Right. This is no different than how we've been doing stuff with the next pages directory forever. And there's no new surprises here in terms of that. We've just been working a lot on kind of honing in on making this relation feel a lot cleaner. And so there's, I guess we should just show, before we move on, maybe something we can do is make show some of the features that SolidStart actually have itself that is actually unique. We talked about the file system routing. That's a big one. The other feature that SolidStart has are these server functions. So it might be fun to just make a server function right now just to kind of get a feel for what it is. So how about I'm just trying to think it doesn't really matter where we mount it. We can just make a button and have it click, do it. But yeah, let's just pop the file. Let's just do it.
Okay.
And we can just make a async function. Call it whatever you want. Let's hello or something like greeting. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then right here, put use server like as a string. Yeah, exactly. And this tells SolidStart that the content of this does not run on the client. So the classic thing exactly. You console log here, and what should happen is if we call this function from, say, a button click or something, we can wire that up. We can just add another button maybe. It doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Let's see how fast I can do this. We'll call hello.
Right. We should see the message only show up on the console on the server, not on the client. Right. And you can see my secrets over and over and over again, and not there. This is the most basic example of a server function. You start being able to see incredible power here because, can we add something? Can we add an argument like put a name on hello? Yeah.
Okay.
Name string.
Just toss it in right there.
Yeah, and now look what happened over to where we called it. Right, essentially now TypeScript is telling you that you didn't call it with an argument, right? So you instantly have type information based on it. This is a big advantage of this over, say, normal API calls. So you can, and because there's no extra different signature, we have different ways to get the request and stuff. You can basically have these swap in identically for existing APIs you already have. Obviously, we're doing a click handler. Let's put a name in there. It doesn't matter. Hello Jason, hello Ryan, whatever you want to put in there. Hello chat works. And, there we go. This obviously, at this point, I don't feel like is, that special. We've seen similar stuff, but the key point here is that is all this is. This has no other behavior. You can return stuff. Actually, that's not true. We have a crazy serializer, which we could get into, where we can serialize promises that serialize promises that we have. I mean, I keep, my biggest problem is I undersell how powerful this thing is. You can literally return a stream and have it stream the content back over the wire, but I'm oh yeah, nothing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing that's interesting to me about this, right, is that, from an implementation standpoint, I have a function,
Yeah.
and like these are both declared in the file, and just by saying where I want to use it, I'm able to make sure that it works where I want it to work, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is the sort of thing that this is deceptively hard, because what we've seen happen in other frameworks is like you end up with you have to have a special file naming convention of like .server.ts, or you have to remember like what the call chain is, because the server function has to be called in a certain way, but if there's like a call chain, it can break and leak secrets. Whereas like having something like this where we just signify right here, okay, don't run this on the client, and then it doesn't run on the client. Right? It's one of those things that it doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize how hard this is to do.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think, yeah, it's easy to undersell, because making something simple sort of it hides the amount of pain that it took to get there.
Right. And it's really important. I mean, obviously the serialization stuff is really cool, like advanced serialization and being able to like stream data and like do stuff, which will come in key maybe a little bit later in the demo here. But what's important for us was this is the only part that SolidStart cares about. Like if you want cool stuff like actions like Remix does, or where you basically load data on the page, and then invalidate it and then refresh the data and do all that stuff. That's not SolidStart's responsibility. SolidStart just goes, oh, if you want to use a server function, you can, but otherwise use your exact client-side APIs as they are, right? The thing is, with Solid, the server function thing that might not be obvious, also not obvious, is you can call these functions as you're rendering on the server, right? Like, and they won't do an RPC call. Like if if you call the function inside home without a click, like let's just put hello chat here, or hello someone else here. Let's hello server or Ryan. Yeah, perfect, Ryan. Okay. Now if we do this and refresh the page, like I guess we have a bit of a history here, you're going to see like hello Ryan run initially on server render. And if you go to about, stay here, and then go back, you'll see hello Ryan again, because it's
being called on the server, like on the initial call.
No, I mean, it should be called when you navigated back as well.
It did, yeah, it's right here. Yeah. And so we get the ability to write an SSR function. So the equivalent to like when I'm in Astro or whatever, and I do like a get initial props in like older frameworks, right? That feel of, I know this is going to execute when the page is initially rendered, or like if we do static generation or whatever it is, it calls then. And also, I get to use that same function as an on-click handler without changing the functionality, and you're changing this under the hood to be the RPC call, so that I don't have to think about that at all.
Right, and also when you navigate back to the same page again from the client side is what I was trying to get at, right? Because if you go back here, see how it's showing Ryan again. It's not, even though it was rendered initially on the server, because it's part of the client side render as well. You can get it on the client every time you go back and forth between the pages as well, or like you can hit it on the server every time. Like the data fetching essentially to show the data you need on that page, whether it originated originally on the server or it's a future client navigation, looks identical.
Yeah.
Right?
This is great. Like this feels really nice. There's a good question in the chat. Do you have guardrails for like client exclusive stuff? So if I start trying to call like, window dot something.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is where things get a little bit tricky. I mean, it won't be defined, so it'll just error.
Okay.
One of the places, it's more the other way that gets a little bit awkward. It's that it's possible for tree shaking to fail in some cases where the server module is effectful, which means that it basically won't let itself be removed from the package. We
Okay.
aren't doing a bunch of fancy. We did in an older version of the plugin. I have to get back there. We were doing like more aggressive tree shaking. Generally speaking, if you close over something that's only used in a server function, it's going to get tree shaken out. Window here is just going to error essentially, like
It'll error entirely.
like when you runtime it because it doesn't exist. It'll say it's undefined when you try and run it. Window. Yeah, I think the more important thing is that in React server components they have something called like server only or something where you import it and then it throws if that piece gets in the client code. I haven't built that. It's literally a one-liner though. You just basically go if not is server throw or something. Solid exports server. I haven't actually built the package for it, but like you could build that in very very quickly, and then basically you can just like mark something as saying it's server only. See, and then if that ever got on a client build, the client build would basically crash immediately.
And then can I do something silly like, let's see, I'm going to assume because we're using Vinci that I can just create a .env here, and I can say like my secret, and we'll say like no one can know this secret, right? And then I come back out here to my index, and let's bring back our other function, and we'll say, we'll call it hello2 this time. And I'm going to get rid of the use server.
Yeah.
And instead, I'm just going to log my secret. So we'll do the import .meta.env and right. And so now when I click this, I reload. Oh, I have to actually call the function. And it doesn't work. So that's good. So I can, it does prevent me from accidentally leaking my server side stuff.
Yeah, to a certain degree, you have to understand that because your secrets are only runtime and not part of the client build, they won't like that. There are ways that I could think of where you could leak certain things. Like with Next and other ones using these kind of things like Remix, there is a potential way to have this stuff happen if you're not paying attention. Like forget to put use server and then like a secret just like this automatically has guards because of Vite, but like there, yeah.
I also am realizing I'm calling something wrong because it's not picking up.
Right. Is this one? God, the meta stuff has been bugging me a bit recently. This one, Vite and Nitro have different settings. I wonder if this one I have to actually put process.env.
Okay. Let's try.
It's because it's running a node locally. Try that.
There it is. Okay.
And
if I do one of these and we go back to here.
The client, I don't think
Still
glitz that get it because it doesn't get in its build. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So yeah, it's doing the thing. It's doing what we want. I mean, this is super cool that this just works. You know.
The reason for this, as I said, is for that transparency. But the thing is, this is all the functionality that SolidStart provides here. I wanted to do more, and I don't think we'll have time to code out more, which means I almost want to just jump to one of the other templates, if you're okay with that.
Let's do it.
I'm trying to decide which one I want to jump to, but let's just run the install script and just jump to it. So. Yeah. Do we want? I guess there's two different demos that I could show off here. There's the one where we show off progressive enhancement and forms and stuff, and then there's actually let's just do the notes one. The notes one is like the super one that has everything.
Okay.
This demo was created originally by the React team when they wanted to showcase server components. See, one of the biggest differences with this mentality here between this and server components is this doesn't change your mental model. The boundary, even though the boundaries are more permissive with these server functions, I don't know if you've been hearing about skew protection on Next.js and Vercel and all this kind of complicated stuff. The reason is if you change a component prop, suddenly, like, basically because the boundaries between client and server components is API surface, any like code change could very easily cause version mismatches. This can happen too with server functions. But generally, people design server functions the way they define API functions. You're defining a function that has set inputs. It's a lot, and there's like pinpoint places where you hit that. Whereas with server components, that can happen like anywhere throughout the tree in like just the way that you literally insert it in the DOM tree, which means that this isn't quite as volatile. But I saw their demo and I was like, as usual, I was like, well, what if I made this demo without server components and had, almost all the same benefits? So the idea of this demo, let's play with it first and then I'll show you how it works. But let's make a new node. Dev mode view. Yeah, okay. Let's make a new node. Okay, so let's give it a title. And then some kind of description. And if you hear, there's actually a markdown preview editor that we load in the browser only when you go on this page.
Oh, nice.
But, yeah, exactly. So, and then when we're ready, we can hit done. And this will update our node here. And this is all client side navigated. There's no like HTML partials. And now, what else can we do in this app? We can expand the node on the side here.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And then we can also it's a client app. So if you expand the node and then click new, and add another node, we're not this is a complete client app, right? We're not losing state,
right? So
right?
it's not
This is right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, if you hide the note, then it will lose the state because it's unmounted. But if but if the other note that's not hidden, the other note that's not hidden will still be expanded, etc. Okay, now let's look at how this is actually implemented. I guess I could have made it work in a way that didn't lose expansion, but you know what I mean.
It's a demo, right?
Yeah. So this app, if we go to app TSX, it's actually not going to be all that different than the other one, except now we have a sidebar in our root here, and it has a search field and button, and then the notes loading have their own suspense boundary around a note list. You see this when you initially load the page. Like if you refresh on the page, I think you might see the loading state. No, it's too fast. Yeah,
I can. Okay. Let me throttle it.
Yeah, it's also possible that we have this one set on defer. You have the ability to choose whether the rendering waits on it, or whether it by default we stream, but you can choose whether the server waits till that piece is loaded to reduce loading spinners versus not. Yeah, it looks like it's set on defer because it pops in. We can actually check that in a minute, but yeah, either that it's really fast because it's local. But the setup for this project is that let's look at a specific route. I think is probably our best bet. Let's go to notes, inside notes, because home is just a blank one, new is a new one. Let's go to, I guess it's let's do preview. It's probably the easier of the two. If you notice, the brackets for us means that's not there. That's just my convention. I hate people having to write the same file name over and over again in all their folders. Like page.tsx in like 50 million folders. So I hated it so much that I got rid of index.tsx as well. When you put parentheses on the file, that means it's like the index route essentially, because there's no path.
So
And-
so effectively, the parentheses are giving us a chance to label it,
Yeah.
but it's not used as routing information.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like your
Got it.
index. So when we go in here, what you're going to see is what most routes look like in Solid Start, which is you export your page. There's a create async call, which is a little lower down, which is where we do our data fetching for the page. And you'll notice though above that there is this route config that also calls the same function with the parameters. Seems like duplication, but the idea here is that you have the ability optionally, and I think it's a good idea when you have client involved, to preload the data for that page. This is so that when hover links go, it will preload that data. It's so that the second, even if the code hasn't loaded for the page in the browser, and you click on that link, it starts preloading in parallel the data for that next page.
Right.
And this is why people use things like loaders. But for us, we call it a preloader. And the important thing to notice here is this route config satisfies route definition.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from Solid Router because we're using Solid Router. But if we didn't use Solid Router, that would be fine too. That route config is whatever the route config is for your router. This is part of that router agnostic thing that I was talking about before.
Oh, right.
So like Solid Router has a preload function. If yours has loader or something, you can just go config, equals object loader satisfies whatever your route definition is. This just gets merged into those definitions from the file system routing system.
Oh, I get it. Okay. I understand.
So this is just our convention for doing preloads. So quite often what you'll see is a function being called in the preload and in the component where it's actually used. And the function itself, get note preview. If we go over and where's it under API, lib API. If we go lib API and look at there, what you're going to see is a bunch of server functions that I just made into a library. And the server functions themselves would be fine. We already played with those. And they're doing a bunch of operations off a KV storage that we installed from Unstorage. Unstorage is a universal KV. You can use it on Netlify, you can use it on Vercel, you can use it with any kind of storage you want. We're just using it in a file system storage in this demo here. But if you can look at all these functions here, they're just using these are all the use server functions. I might have just put use server on the top level and just made them all server functions, but I wanted to add extra behavior that has nothing to do with server functions themselves that work universally, whether you're just CSR or not. And that's what these cache in action. If you look, you see cache in action wrapping these server functions. Well, cache is kind of like React Cache, kind of like React Query. It's this idea that you can set a cache key, which you see at the bottom there. The second argument is like note preview. You can set a cache key for the data that you send. And this creates some reactive invalidation and automatic deduplication on the server. And then the action is another one where if we scroll down just a little bit so we can see the bottom of the save note.
Oh, whoops, I just clicked the wrong button in my, hold on. Here we go. All right, if I scroll down.
A little bit, yeah.
Action.
To the bottom so we can get most of the save note in here. What you'll see is that, yeah, this one's actually using a form data, but it's actually using a combination of data and form data. We'll look at that in a minute. But then let's go right down to the bottom. It's setting stuff, it's saving stuff. And then you'll see stuff like return redirect here. It has routing information. You can return responses. It's actually based on Remix's approach. But you can also invalidate certain cache keys. By default, like Remix, it invalidates all the keys, but you can actually tell it, say, only, the redirect is just a response helper. You can set like a header that says only invalidate this key. And this behavior is not a behavior of server functions, it's a behavior of actions. So we've basically just taken a a very basic concept and given it a whole bunch of superpowers of invalidation and automatic handling just by wrapping them. And because you scroll at the top, cache and action, import, let's go to the import. And redirect, they come from the router. They're not part of SolidStart. Right? If you don't want to use any of this stuff and you want to use TanStack, go for it. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Like, use React or Solid Query, right? They have their own cache and mutation. The key part here is Solid's router is familiar with this. Create async automatically handles the serialization on initial render. Caching is automatically restored. This magic combination means that when you wire stuff up like this, it will automatically serialize and manage SSR. So like when you render it on the server, it'll fetch it on the server and then send that data along with the stream on the client without it refetching. And then, at some point later, you can, while you're client navigating, you'll hit these endpoints again and, have it all update.
Gotcha.
And this, these systems just keep on compounding with each other. Like the save note does a redirect to the next page, right? Mm-hmm. But because of the preload function, we actually know while we're doing this action that where we're going next. So
we've got the data here.
Yeah, well, we got the data here, but we're not actually passing it through. Generally, with these action loader patterns, you perform the action, and then you do a get on the other side to pull the data out. It's the same thing with TanStack. You do an invalidation, you do a mutation, and then you pull the data back. Right. So, in classic HTML forms, you do a post, and then you do the get, and you get the next page you're going to. Like when we save our note. Can we go back to our notes example, and can we actually run it in the browser? Like
I got you. Yeah.
And I want you to open the network tab, for me, like the dev tools for a second. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
And let's get the network going. Okay, sweet. Now let's add a new node. Okay. And can we change actually the filter to fetch XHR?
Yeah. Got it.
Okay. And let's add one more node. And click done.
Okay. So
Well,
it's in here.
Okay, and now when you hovered, another one came and you hovered another one.
Because I did the prefetches.
Right. But what I want to show you is scroll up to that first request that you did, the post. Mm-hmm. Look at the response for a second. I know this is a little bit technical, but I want people to see this. Ooh. It didn't just do the post. See, this is showing our advanced serialization. We're actually serializing promises across the wire. It actually fetched the data for the next page while you were still on the previous page in the client. So where most libraries, what would happen is you would post your data, and then it'd come back and the client would be like, oh, sweet, it's succeeded. And it'll redirect in the client, and the client will go, okay, next page, load my data for the page. Well, if you remember, we had those preload functions.
Right.
So on the server, we can do the preload. So when we're doing the action, it's like, oh, we're going to redirect here. We can respond immediately from the server with the redirect to tell the client, hey, I'm going to redirect. But while it's in flight, we can start preloading the data for the next page while we're still on the server and stream it all along the same request. So instead of doing like 2 requests for a post, we do it in 1 request. This is a similar benefit you get with things like server actions or like the way MPAs work, except we bring this advantage straight to client frameworks. In fact, this single fetch move works if SSR is off.
Okay.
Like we remove the waterfall on mutation that pretty much exists in all single page apps. I felt for a while that this was one of the biggest benefits of MPAs and of like server components. And I was like, oh, wait, we can do this without actually changing anything, right? We already know this information. This is like taking your routing information, taking your like cache information. And if you have both worlds, you can basically improve the time of every interaction by double. I mean, don't get me wrong. When you do a mutation, typically, you could always return that data and update the stuff yourself, right? But what Remix showed us with optimistic updates and all these kind of things is that people hate managing caches.
Yes.
The reason Apollo is so hard was because the cache management, like, yes, it could do these crazy things.
I was literally about to cite Apollo is like why this is so exciting to me because I remember writing the mutations with optimistic updates, and then you got to find your cache key and like replace data in the object, and if you screw it up, the whole thing breaks, and it was like, oh my god. So the fact that you've sort of abstracted all of this into it just works is really nice, and knowing that when I'm looking at my code here, that what I have to get right for this to function is I have to remember my cache keys. And if I do this, everything else works.
You treat it like you treat TanStack query. Everyone loves using TanStack query. The problem with that approach is that you typically have to do a waterfall because you're on the client and you go, I have to do my mutation, check, do my invalidation. But we can just do it in one step.
Yeah, this is slick. And so you're saying too that with the way that SolidStart is set up, if I'm using TanStack query, it will solve this problem for TanStack query as well, or is this unique to your router?
This piece right now is unique to the router. I'm looking about putting a protocol out there for there. But as I said, like the server functions give us the mechanism for it. The router is the thing that knows, because like, the difference between our preload functions and Remix loaders is they load one thing, it's like a single async function that runs on the server. Our preload functions run isomorphically, like they run on the client and the server, and you can have as many server function calls as you want in there. So we can do stuff like this is where I started really diverging from server components, because say you have 5 different data sources on your page and you perform an action. What happens with server components is you have to re-render like the whole page. It's a mutation. We don't know what changed. So then it goes on the server and it re-renders everything. Now you have to fetch all the data, even the stuff that didn't update in that case. So how do you solve that? Well, you put a cache function on the server. This is why Next is so crazy about caching, because they know the performance would go like to pits if every mutation meant you had to fetch every single thing all over again. But that cache has to live on the server, because the server is the only thing that like can know, because you have to re-render it. It's a single thread, it's a single thing. So like you get in there and let's say you have a couple layers of nesting, you got 5 sources here, 5 sources there, you got 10 sources. Next will correctly, when you invalidate, will be like, yes, those 2 things need to be updated, the other 8 don't. But it also still re-renders the whole page, and which means it basically serializes the data for all 10 sources just to update the 2. And you needed to buy into having I don't know if it costs any money, but you need to have a KV, you need to have server infrastructure to actually support this, and the thing just keeps on going on. What's really cool about this approach is it's like the cache still lives in the client. It's like it's outside of the use server, right?
Right.
Like you see cache and then use servers on the inside, which means that it's like our client-side routing approaches, where you don't need any KV on the server, because the client basically knows what's cached. So and the server, and because this action can be fine-grained to exactly what needs to be invalidated, you can just say, oh yeah, I want to invalidate those 2 things. You're not rendering the whole page. You're just sending back the data for those 2 things. And if the next page has data that's not on the current page, we do this diffing as well. We'll actually fetch that as well. So like pretend you have like, as part of that redirect, you actually also have to fetch 3 new things because it's on the new page. You will, get the 2 things back you invalidated and those 3 things. So we use the combination of knowing what page you're on and where you're going to be able to fetch only the data that's updated, which means we don't need server-side caches.
This is one of those problems. Like I remember, back in the, almost 10 years ago now, when I was working at IBM and first introducing GraphQL there, this was a problem that we dealt with. When I moved over to Gatsby, this was a problem that we dealt with. When I was at Netlify, every single framework we were trying to figure out how do we do good cache invalidation that doesn't become a huge foot gun for people, that doesn't require somebody to understand how all of the data across their entire app is interconnected. And we just never found a solution that didn't mean full control end to end.
Yeah.
And what's really nice here is that you have that control.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what we've been missing. And the funny thing is, it doesn't feel like the buy-in. Like all you have to do is use server. Like that's the extent of you buying into it is deciding that you're going to use server functions, because now we control serialization and deserialization on both sides. We control the whole piece. And what's beautiful, you mentioned those places having primitives like Netlify. Netlify has these great CDN cache primitives.
Right.
If you didn't want to use Solid's action approach here, this works really well with Netlify's invalidation CDN stuff, because it's the same kind of concept, right? If you set up your data to be fine-grained, like I'm mentioning here, where you have the separate server functions or pieces, then you can cache those requests technically, and you can and in the same places where we say, hey, invalidate this specific, only this data here, you can say actually invalidate it from the CDN for this specific data here, and it's the same game again. So like because we use responses like return redirect, we picked that piece up from Remix, and like it's very brilliant to kind of use web standards here as the approach, because we at the same time solve the problem that has never been really solved cleanly for single page apps. So like we've removed all the waterfalls. There's other ways we remove waterfalls. Me and some guy from the React team will argue about waterfalls to the end of time. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to say that from my perspective, we've solved the data fetching waterfalls and the mutations waterfalls as well, if not considerably better than, like, you don't need RCs for this. And it kind of uses web standards. It's kind of crazy.
Well, so I think this is the part where I feel like this is the hill that I'm going to die on, is if you solve a problem by inventing a new standard that everybody has to adopt in order to solve the problem, you're fighting a losing battle, because you're asking everybody to change everything in order to match the new way of doing things, right? Whereas if you build on top of existing standards, people are already doing most of what they need to do to get the benefit of your thing, and they don't have to like do major rewrites to their code. They don't have to make these giant shifts in their mental models. They don't have to retrain every new team member to understand how the new code works. They just get to keep using the knowledge they already have, and it gets more useful because the thing they're doing got smarter because it's built on web standards.
Yeah, no, it's great. Okay, Jason, I know we don't have a lot of time. I want to do one more demo. I want to squeeze it in. I think let's do it. Can we install the classic to-do MVC demo here? So let's just do one more repo pull down, because I got one more feature to show you. I think we also have the best optimistic update system in all frameworks. So I want to showcase that off.
Okay, let's do let's see, part 3. And SolidStart, and we're going for to do MVC.
To MCC, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then we're gonna go into here. I'm gonna npm install.
Yeah. And yeah. Sorry, I haven't been keeping up with chat. I hope chat's following along.
There've been everybody's kind of keeping up. There've been a couple side chats about things like nested routing and stuff. Dev's been answering questions.
That's great.
But yeah, we're in pretty solid shape here, and y'all keep in mind we got about 9 minutes left, so we're gonna look at this, and if anybody's got questions, you can drop them in. We'll try to either get them or Ryan can take them for his next stream.
Yeah. I just want to show this one off. If you could play with it for a second if you want to, just to kind of show the functionality, but this is your typical to do MVC example.
I'm gonna open it just so that people can see what it looks like, and then we'll go into the code.
Yeah.
So here is to do MVC. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong route.
Yeah, I don't know if the two. I didn't make a 404 route on this demo. Okay, add a couple to dos really quickly. You see the purple? That's actually optimistic updates. I have a simulated delay. It's pretty quick. How about cross and check off a couple of them? See if they. Yeah, it's hard to see. It
happens fast.
There is optimistic updates in here. The other thing is these are all single flight.
In so you can see the color change.
These are all single flight mutations as well. So that trick I showed you earlier, where it doesn't do two, it doesn't do two. If you look like on the network tab, just trust me, if we don't have to do that again, you'll see that when we do the mutation, it'll actually return the list of to-dos again. See, like there's the to-dos coming back, like the refresh. And this is important because if you have multiple data sources, and Solid actually uses something really smart here called create async store, which actually diffs the data rather than the DOM. So nothing re-renders except for like the one thing that changes. No components rerun, but then just the single like piece that signal updates, like just like, oh, that's now it's checked, single update. But let's look at the code. So if you go to the routes here, the app is basically basic. The whole app is in this one file. And from libapi, I made a bunch of server functions and actions, right? They're going to look just like what we did in the Notes app because they're literally using that same KV storage from unstorage, which is the un.js thing. It's the same kind of thing. You could pretend this is your SQL for all intents and purposes. We're just... It doesn't matter. They're just use server and they're wrapped in cache and action, okay? But then if you go into your into your index route, you're going to see some code here. And what we've done here for the actions is we wanted to have that optimistic state. So let's just pause here, right? So you see use submission. So you can basically, the way actions work in Solid is that there's an action like toggle to do or edit to do. And you can define it globally and import it to any component on your page. So even if it's disconnected, I heard some weird thing that you have to only use submissions inside the forms index or something. That's bonkers to me. You can literally have like be down deep where your form is and then have something in the top corner, like a cart. Like this is a very common problem. And you can just have the same action basically being read way out of scope. Because I'm assuming that from your input, you can identify that you have the route. And that's why these all have filters. Just say, get me the action of type toggle to do that matches the ID of the current list item that I'm looking at.
Got it. Okay.
The input is the array of inputs that I send to the server when I do my submission. And you might be going, okay, for toggling to do, what is that list of inputs? Well, as it would turn out, if we scroll down a little bit, to seeing where we use toggle to do, it's toggle to do with to do ID. Now, what's with? It's our way. I don't like closure extraction. I think it's leaky abstraction. Sorry. So if you want to bind something to your action, we use a with command. So what this is saying is this way you can take something in scope. You have the action declared globally, and then within this scope, you're saying call the action with this ID and all the form fields in this thing, and then the first argument will be the ID, and then the next argument will be the form data. And so this is a way of like keying the action per row here. And let's scroll up a little bit. Actually, you know what? I can probably help. No, never mind. Yeah, you scroll up a little bit. What you can kind of see here is we can use this submission while it's in flight to kind of make smart state. Like, am I pending? It's if toggle all is pending, toggle to do is pending, or editing to do is pending. Because there's 3 different submissions in flight here. Am I completed? Well, again, you end up, instead of updating a cache, you end up combining the states of all these in-flight submissions. I think that the easiest one to see might be if we scroll down, because I ported this example from Remix. The trick to this whole thing is there's going to be a second for loop underneath the main for loop if we go down here, because this is where we're showing all the to-dos that are in flight that haven't been submitted yet, and it's a more simplified version, right? Above is the ones that have already been submitted, and these are the optimistic to-dos that are in flight. And then
so if I go in here then and like
we
throttle.
Or set the delay long, but yeah, let's throttle. See, it's purple.
I gotta go faster. Yeah.
Do a few though.
Look at that. Oh, I get it. Okay. And that is not wild to think about. Like this makes a lot of sense to me because we're just pulling anything out of the, like, if it's pending, it goes into this adding to do.
Right, exactly. And the way we do this is we have two versions. We have use submission and use submissions. So you can choose whether you want it to be a list optimistic or you care about a single one. In this case, it's a list. So it's very easy to make a list and show the multiple in flight as it's easy to filter on specific ones. And yeah, if we go at the top here, yeah, see remaining count. Like there's some fun calculations you have to do when you do this, like where you're like, it's to-do's length plus adding to-do's length minus the current filtered completed, minus the completed length. Like it took me a minute to figure out how to combine the states.
Yeah.
But this means that the optimistic derived values also reflect. So while it's pending adding, you actually update the counts. So you actually see that the like remaining count goes up optimistically. And yeah, as I said, I thought Remix was really genius for kind of coming up with these kind of things, because there's no cache writing here. If something errors, it stays there as part of the optimistic state, and you can like add an is error check. I'm missing the error, I think, in this demo right now, but you have these submissions which you can access basically anywhere, and then update the UI. And between this and single flight mutations and all these pieces, you don't actually, the extent of your cache mentality is basically tan stack, like query. Like that's kind of like your thing. You're like, I have some keys. You're never manually writing to the cache. Very rarely. I mean, there's some APIs low level, but you like this is kind of the developer experience that I was going through. Single flight mutations, global optimistic updates, etc. I mean, this is the crazy thing about SolidStart. I can start at a specific place and go really deep on any specific thing, because like these aren't all SolidStart features. If you look at this, use submission comes from the router.
Right.
Like this is just how I chose to use SolidStart, right?
I get you. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is really slick, and so I feel like we could look at this stuff all day because there's so many cool things going on. But let's we have just a couple of minutes left. Actually, we're out of time. Oh wow. Okay, so if people want to learn more, I'm gonna direct to SolidStart's website. I'm going to direct to your links. Where else should people go if they want to learn more about this?
Honestly, if they go to Solid website, you will have access to SolidStart docs, etc. I believe we should have access to the docs. Right now, our unified docs, if you click on documentation, it's right there. You will actually see SolidStart, the router, all in the same place. And then we also have a link to our Discord. And yeah, everything is there. Between GitHub, the site, and Discord, you will find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And a quick shout out again to Netlify for covering the captioning. Thank you to Vanessa from White Coat Captioning for being here today. And thank you for Tuple for providing the ability. I don't know if you saw it a couple times when Ryan and I were doing cursors at the same time. That's because we were sharing screen with Tuple. So thank you very much to all of that. And make sure you keep your eye on this page here. You can get on the newsletter if you want to stay updated. You can get in my Discord. You can do whatever you want. But we've got a whole lot of episodes that I haven't put up on the website yet, including we're going to have Daishi from Waku come on. We're going to have, you know what? I'm not even going to try to remember this list because it's incredible and I'm going to get it wrong. So just keep your eye. It's going to be probably this week. I'll have the schedule updated. So take your notes, make your lists. We'll see you then. Ryan, thank you so much for taking some time with us today. This was so much fun. Really appreciate you being here. Any parting words before we wrap this up?
Honestly, just keep building and don't be afraid to try stuff, because you never know where you're going to end up.
I love it. On that, we're going to end this one. Thanks, y'all, for hanging out. We'll see you next time.